Okay, so let's start with where we are on the budget and the bill that was passed. What does it mean, and how does it impact people here in Kansas?
It impacts people in Kansas because the state will continue in its long, slow decline that the governor has put in place with his tax cuts. We do not have a balanced budget. We're robbing from the highway plan yet again, taking away most of the sales tax that goes to the highway plan, so we'll delay or cancel many more highway projects, making our roads less safe. We are going to cut our universities another year by $17 million. So though as a courtesy, we're going to give universities permission now to raise tuition. There was a cap put on tuition increases last year that's taken away. So while we're cutting universities by $17 million, we're giving them permission to pass that $17 million on to students and families in increased debt by lifting the cap on tuition increases. We supposedly are protecting K-12 schools. We'll see how that works out if things continue on the decline they are, and the revenue as it declines. But we've given the governor permission to cut 3 to 5% out of almost every other agency. So we're going to see more declines in the quality of service you can count on for other state services. So we're going to continue in our decline. We just today received another bond downgrading over the transportation plan. So Kansas now has had its, I believe, 4th credit downgrade since Brownback took office. We're in a mess. We have no recovery. We're just saddling ourselves with debt. We're using future money to pay current debt, and continuing to pray after how many years now, since 2012, for the miracle to kick in, the miracle that's never going to happen.
What would you say? Representative Gene Vickery has said that they've made life in Kansas better. Are we better off today?
Ask yourself, have Gene explain why school districts in his district have to come crawling to the finance council to get additional money so they don't have to shut their doors. That's what happened last time around. We have not made life better for Kansans. We've made it worse, and we continue to downgrade the quality of life in this state. We are canceling highway projects. Our roads will become unsafe. Our schools will continue to see, even when you talk about, well, the governor can't cut schools, but schools can't make up for inflationary increases or the cuts that have already taken place to them. We're in very bad shape. Things continue to get worse, and Kansans will feel the pain of this budget and this governor and his tax plan.
Well, and you mentioned the kind of fencing off of schools in this budget, but could the governor use his line item veto power to simply take that out?
I believe he could. That's probably a question better for the people who work on vetoes and analyze whether or not it is correct or not and how that law answers. But he does have line item veto through budget bills, and this was a budget bill.
Okay. Talk to me about capers for just a second. Should people be worried about their capers right now? Is it solvent? Should they be worried about their checks coming if they're retired?
No, if you're retired, your checks are going to come. Checks will continue to come in the foreseeable future. The problem with what they did with capers, they've delayed $100 million from capers payments with this easily broken promise to pay it back. And in fact, now they've said, well, we've essentially delayed it indefinitely. If revenue comes in higher than estimates, then we're going to use that money to pay off our debt to capers. If the tobacco settlement money comes in over the amount that's allocated for childhood programs, early childhood programs, then we'll use that money for capers. But there's no, first of all, out of the last 13 months now, we've seen 2 months when we've exceeded expectations. This month happened to be one of them, the estimates that came out yesterday. Understand, though, that this increase of $2.6 million over expectations for this past month is not necessarily good news. You understand that it is an increase based on lowered expectations. So every time we lower what we expect to get, at some point we're going to lower it so far that we actually bring in more money than the expectations. We have lowered those expectations over and over and over again. We've continued to miss the mark on lowered expectations. This month, we lowered the estimates, we lowered the expectations again, and lo and behold, we finally hit one of them.
So it's kind of a revenue mirage.
It is, absolutely.
Okay. What about you had suggested that there was kind of an analogy for how they're kicking the can down the road for capers and what that means in terms of the actuarial part of capers. Explain that just a little bit.
Well, it's not a matter of kicking the can down the road. It's a matter of we are not handling the unfunded actuarial liability in the way that we promised in reform bills that were passed. The reason that capers has had problems is because the legislature for years and years and years has failed to meet its actuarial obligations to the system. The employees, the state employees, the teachers, all the people that are participants in capers have never missed a payment, and they've always paid the required amount of them. We agreed to increase that a couple of years ago, the amount that we would pay in to try and shore things up. The state said at that time they would increase theirs. And now here we are saying, well, we've increased it, but we're just not going to pay it now. What happens is that left unpaid, without the legislature paying into the system at the appropriate time, the appropriate amount of money, we can't help but expand the unfunded actuarial liability. In the short term, that doesn't matter that much. The liability is, if everyone were to take their capers right now, would we have enough money to cover those checks? We would not. But the fact is that not everybody takes it at the same time, and so that risk goes over many, many years, and there's a liability, but it's not jeopardizing checks. But the greater you make that liability, and the more you delay or simply don't put the money into the system, ultimately you'll get to the point where the system can't work. Whether that's what they want to happen, I don't know. But that's the reality. The legislature has worked hard, as have the employees, the active capers employees, to shore up the system, and now we're abandoning, or the state, I would say, is abandoning its obligations to the system by delaying these. You heard that in the arguments on the floor when Representative Johnson, a Republican member of the House who chairs the Capers Committee, said he could not vote for the budget because of this. And Representative Trimmer, who has been key to Capers Solutions, said the same thing. We are ultimately going to harm the system if we don't actually commit to our obligations.
Okay, another question that we've been getting has to do with the Senate, I think it was a Senate bill on the LLC pass-throughs, and why so many Dems and moderate Republicans voted that bill down. Some people feel like it should have been voted for, but there's a broader picture here, so help us understand what that is.
Well, the LLC exemption, this is the exemption under which more than 330,000 Kansas business owners pay no income tax. It's bad for tax collections, and it's unfair to the taxpayers of the state. It's unfair when, for example, an attorney who's a partner in a firm pays no income tax while his law clerk and receptionist do. That's just patently unfair. The LLC exemption has to be repealed. However, it doesn't alone solve the problem before us. And we put ourselves in a position by only repealing that one little piece of the Brownback tax plan of pretending to have fixed the problem, or giving some people the ability to say, we fixed the problem, we repealed the LLC tax break, when in reality, a lot of money is being lost just in the reduction of rates, and we need to do a comprehensive overhaul or repeal of the Brownback tax cuts to get back to normal. So we could, I liken it to pulling a Band-Aid off my hairy arm. I can yank that Band-Aid off and have pain and be done with it, or I can take little pulls at it, one at a time, they're all painful, and get to the same point. There are some who say we should have repealed the LLC exemption simply because it was the right, fair thing to do. The problem is, if that absolves some legislators of the responsibility to return to a common sense income tax plan, in other words, they can say, I'm not voting for another tax increase next year. Let's do this all at once. And I think that's where the people who voted no on the repeal are of two groups. Moderates and Democrats who voted no want to have a tax bill that will solve the problem, that will move us back to where we can pay for schools, we can pay for transportation, we can pay for public safety, and so on. They don't want to pass a tax, what will be labeled a tax increase, that does nothing. We would get no money out of that until, virtually no money until 2018, so it does nothing for the problems we're having right now. Other people who voted no simply don't want to repeal it, and they would just be happy eliminating and destroying government services. So you had hard-right conservatives who were in the governor's camp voting no, and you had moderates and Democrats voting no because they want comprehensive tax reform that solves the problem, what we call option 4.
It sounds like they kind of thought this might be an election year ploy by some, and would rather really hold their feet to the fire in its entirety, so that they could get a true plan out there.
It absolutely is an election year ploy. That's the only reason it was offered. It was offered as an election year ploy. If you want to solve the problem, you've got to go to what we call option 4, which is either a complete repeal of the Brownback tax cuts, income tax cuts, or some other option. There are many things that could be discussed. They could discuss restoring a third and fourth tax bracket for very high income earners. They could do a lot of things to make the system more fair and to generate the kind of revenue they need to maintain services.
Okay, so for folks that are out there and who are obviously fed up after whatever we are 6 years of this, what can they do? We're in an election year. What do you suggest they do?
Well, there's really only one thing to do at this point, and that's to pay attention to these elections and vote. Vote these people out of office. Anyone that stands up and continues to say the Brownback plan makes sense or the sun is shining in Kansas needs to be retired from the legislature. If they won't stand up for the quality of life in Kansas that we want and expect and deserve, then they need to be thrown out of office and replaced by someone who values public education, who values a good, solid infrastructure of highways and bridges and roadways, who values public safety, who values parks and recreation, the Wildlife and Parks Department, who values services to take care of our most vulnerable citizens. We need to put those people in office. We now have a very good idea of who it is that is leading this state to the verge of collapse. Those people need to be thrown out of the legislature. You got to vote for quality of life.
So if I'm someone who wants to do more than just pay attention to it, and I really want to get involved, where do I start?
Well, you start by looking at candidates and listening to candidates, looking at who's filing for races in your area, going to meetings, going to listen to those candidates and hearing what they say. When you find the right candidates, you should contribute some money to their campaigns, because I can tell you that those who are intent on destroying our state services, they're going to put a lot of money into preserving their legislative majority. So you've got to help those candidates that are going to right the ship financially. You also need to help them with work, whether that's helping them knock doors, talking to neighbors, making phone calls, whatever it takes to get those people elected. Go to forums, hold people's feet to the fire, and then ultimately get to your polling place and vote.
Why is the August primary election equally as important as the November general election?
Well, the August primary is critical because Kansas is such a heavily Republican state. Republican registration just far outstrips Democratic registration. So there are many places in Kansas where there might not even be a Democratic candidate. There will be a Republican primary. If you don't vote in the Republican primary and there's no Democratic candidate, then your voice is not heard. But there are certain places where the Republican primary is what matters. And frankly, if we can elect through the primary process in August good traditional Republicans, then your worries should be over. You've got a choice between a Democrat or a Republican, both of whom believe in Kansas, believe in state services, and believe in serving the people of Kansas.
So in effect, if there's only two Republican candidates, for example, and I don't vote in August in that Republican primary, I miss essentially what becomes the general election for that race, because that person's going to then go on in November unopposed.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.